Hey, before you take off, you got to listen to this episode of Shoe In.
You're often thinking about that legacy that you continue to build on. But more so, it's like, how do you maintain the customer's attention when attention is so fleeting? And so that's really been a focus for us. We have to be innovative.
Hey, welcome back to another exciting edition of the Shoe In Show. I'm your host, Matt Priest. I'm joined today by Christie Horan as my co-host. And Christie, one of the things that I like about this podcast is that we talk to brands and executives from across the spectrum as it relates to the style, the comfort, where they're manufactured, what consumer they're serving. So today it's a little unique because we're not talking the Far East, we're not talking athletic, we're not talking about all the things that we a lot of times we do talk about, but this is a heritage brand, which is a lot of fun to unpack.
Yes, so today we have on Logan Bird, President and CEO of Mephisto USA. Logan, we usually start off the show by sharing your shoe story. So what is your shoe story? How did you get into the footwear industry? And what ultimately led you to Mephisto USA?
Great question. My shoe story goes back to the kind of core time of the glory days at Zappos, as I like to put it. I was fortunate enough to be there during what was some peak moments when we were still throwing epic parties in Las Vegas and leaving everybody with memorable examples of some key times that were very, very special to me. So my origin story begins in Las Vegas at Zappos headquarters. I was there for about 5 to 6 years. And then I wandered away into the apparel industry thinking I might find something as cool as the footwear industry that had similar types of relationships, and it just didn't exist. So I was fortunate enough to find my way back into the footwear industry with Mephisto. Been here now for about 4 years and then been loving it ever since.
Now, when you think about Mephisto and your role as the CEO of Mephisto USA, how did you land that? And kind of day one, when you stepped into the opportunity, what was kind of top of mind for you as you were taking on the role?
For me, a lot of it was still about maintaining what was the core identity of this brand, right? You kind of spoke to it right away, Matt, about, we have a legacy brand that's been around for almost 70 years. We've been almost in the US for about 40 years. So for me, it was really stepping into and really trying to find a way to build on the continuity that already existed within our brand today, right? We have a hyper loyal customer. Everybody that has ever worn a pair of Mephistos will tell you, they're one of the most comfortable shoes you will ever put on your feet. And so, you're coming into a brand that has an expectation that you want to be able to continue to deliver on. And you want to really be able to focus on how do you deliver that for the customer, while also being able to kind of introduce that to new customers constantly and doing it in different ways, right? Our core demographic has constantly leaned older, but how do we continue to reinvent that? How do we make that younger? How do we make it more interesting? And that's been a huge part of my focus since I joined the brand, but more specifically since becoming president and CEO has been trying to figure out how do we move a bit faster, right? In the world today, you're required to be dynamic. You're required to make content. You're required to kind of make sure that the brand is constantly in front of consumers. Otherwise, you're forgot about. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of been top of mind that, when people ask me, what keeps you up at night? Why can't you sleep? And besides, 3 little kids running around my house and keeping me up, I'm just constantly thinking about, what is the brand doing to stay relevant? Because we've been around for so long, right? You're often thinking about that legacy that you continue to build on. But more so, it's like, how do you maintain the customer's attention when attention is so fleeting? And so that's really been a focus for us. We have to be innovative. We have to be thinking, mobile and digital first. And then you have to now be thinking about, what does that digital content presence look like on a daily basis to keep your brand relevant?
Totally. And you touched on it a little bit about the comfort, how you're comfort first and consistency over change. Mephisto has built its reputation by doing something a little bit different than the footwear industry, since there is so much constant change and you're saying keeping up with digital trends and all of that. So how has that discipline and being a heritage brand, how has that become one of the biggest competitive advantages to you?
I think it's become a competitive advantage because we're focused on what our core identity is, right? We're not a fashion brand. We might have fashion elements to our brand to try to take existing styles and silhouettes and make them a bit more modern for what the consumer is looking for. But we understand what brought the customer to us, and we're really trying to stay focused on what maintains that customer with us. And so if it is comfort, which it is, it's our technology, it's our comfort that drives our business, we know that has to be central and core to what's going to continue to drive our identity, bring us new customers, and keep existing customers. So that's kind of always been the focus, an area where we want to be able to continue to drive that home and make sure that that messaging gets across to them, because more often than not, you're going to find us digitally than you are in physical space. And, you may not have a chance to try the product on until it gets to your house.
Before we hit record on this discussion, Logan, our producer was like, don't mention the World Cup, because we try to keep these conversations evergreen. But I'm going to totally buck the trend, because one of the narratives around the World Cup has been Europeans in particular coming to the U.S. and experiencing America for the first time and understanding kind of the beauty that is this nation and our people. And you are a French brand, and you're entrusted with bringing a European brand, and continuing that 40-year legacy in the North American and American markets. Like, is there a lesson there right in front of us for us to take back, or for you to take back to the brand itself, about what translates between the European market and the American market?
Yeah, it's a thing that I constantly think about, Matt. It's one of the things that I'll often quote the CEO of Adidas, who came into the U.S. market a couple of years ago and said, for us to be successful in America, we have to be more American. And it's one of the things that I constantly preach when I go back to France, and I go, I understand what we're doing, but there's always going to be a little bit of an American thumbprint that we have to put on everything we do here to make it so centric for what our identity is, right? But by many accounts, customers only know us based upon our presence here in the United States. They haven't had the opportunity to experience the brand in Europe or in Asia or other parts of the world. And the U.S. consumer is different, right? And I've loved the stories coming out of the World Cup. I'm glued to, X and reading the stories and everything that everybody has to say about it. It's an amazing moment to watch the country kind of pull people together and see how incredible this country is. I love America, and that'll never change. And it's been great to see. But I think as we think about it from a business perspective, the U.S. is very different, right? On our day-to-day interactions, how we get around, you walk a lot more in Europe. We drive a lot more here, right? The person, the body type, a lot of those things are different. So we have to take that within context. So I do kind of shout that from the rooftops, that our goal is to take the identity of the brand, but translate it for who the consumer is here. And that's the feedback when I go back to France and talk with our design teams. That becomes intrinsic to who we are, right? We have to make those changes. We have to make those tweaks to make it relevant for the brand in the largest market in the world.
Yeah. Talking about the future of comfort, Mephisto was built with the goal of building the best shoe in the world. So not only in Europe, but also you're bringing it here to the USA. What do you hope, like several decades from now, what Mephisto brings, and how are you getting in touch with, like you said, the younger generation?
I would hope, if anything, that the legacy of craftsmanship, comfort, and heritage continues to exist. I love nothing more than when you see one style that kind of created the brand as an iconic product continues to exist for decades to come, right? Nothing cooler to me is to see generations of customers wearing a shoe, right? A shoe that my grandfather might have worn, that I wear, and now that I'm putting, my 4-year-old son into. To me, it's one of the coolest things, right? I always think about a product like Stan Smith. You'll go back to Adidas, a product that reaches across generations, that is timelessly cool. To me, that's one of the things that I want to leave, I want our brand to focus on as like a lasting legacy of, having these iconic products that, regardless of the generation or time, its impact is felt. People understand why they exist, and that they're purpose driven. And because they're purpose driven, it drives home what the brand is meant to be and why the consumer continues to love it and why it works for everybody.
Now let's unpack the craftsmanship aspect of it, Logan. You guys, what's your sourcing profile? Like, majority of the 2.5 billion pairs that flow into the U.S. marketplace are sourced from Asia, right? And predominantly for China, although that number is now at a low that we haven't seen since 1990. But that's not your story. And with that comes the higher value of the craftsmanship and the product itself. But walk us through where your shoes are made and how that might set you apart from some of your competitors.
Yeah, great question. We come kind of from a unique point of view, Mephisto, where we actually own all of our own manufacturing still. So we have factories connected to our headquarters in Saarburg, France. So that's one of our main factories. And then our second and largest factory is actually in Portugal. So 90% of the products that we make come out of our own factories. 100% are still coming out of Europe. So just when demand overflows, we still have partner factories within the region that help support specific construction types or new design developments that we're doing. But our focus is still to be the manufacturers, to own essentially the entire creation and supply chain ourselves. And so today, when I go back to France and I work with the development and design teams, it's one of the coolest things that you get to experience is seeing something and then getting to see it made, right? And we often get to see prototypes that come out throughout our entire weeks there while we're working on the line to kind of see the entire process. But we are very unique in that sense where we're still building it. We're one of the few manufacturers that is a brand left in Europe at this point.
I saw recently when I was doing, some research for this episode that you partnered with or did a collaboration with Kith. Can you talk a little bit about that and if there's anything in the future that you have planned or something similar to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Kith was an incredible experience. I think anybody who is in the footwear industry looks at Kith and looks at Ronnie and kind of knows that they've been the standard for what it means to be relevant to a younger consumer, what it means to be, on the cutting edge of making a brand interesting and really cool. I've been a fan for decades. I hate to fanboy something, but I have been. I've collected shoes from Kith for far too long, but I love what they represent. I love the attitude that Ronnie and his team take in terms of collaborative efforts that are meaningful to him and that always have a story behind it, right? And, when they approached us, it was, Ronnie has a heritage with David Z and with a comfort shoe background. He loves black and brown shoes, and his team came to us and said, hey, this is kind of what we're noticing. This is where we'd like to take the trend and to take one of our iconic silhouettes, the match. We'd like to do it in these 3 colorways. It's going to be a part of our spring collection. So all things in my mind that are just kind of blowing my mind going through the process. But it was an incredible team to work with, so detail oriented. They cared about every step of the process. And it was an incredible way to see our product reimagined through the lens of somebody else. That's what I love about, these type of collaborative efforts that continue to be a major focus for us as a brand, because it does translate who is the end consumer that's going to see the product at the end of the day. And so collaborations continue to be a really big key focus. I'm not looking for a collaboration a month, but I'm looking for key partners that reinvent, our core products in a way that translates it to their customer base, but also introduces Mephisto to new customers. And we've found a ton of success with that, with the partners of Kith and Concepts. And we have a great pipeline that we're building out for the next 12 to 18 months that'll continue to work on that. And it's very exciting. I mean, I love nothing more than see, interesting silhouettes of shoes that come about with different materials, different design features, and then also bringing elements of the other brands or designers that we work with.
I mean, Logan, when that call came in or that email hit your inbox that Kith was knocking on your door, what was that like? Because one, it's a verification or a justification of the value of Mephisto's brand in the U.S. marketplace from one of the key retailers here. I mean, actually globally, to be honest with you. So talk to me about when that hit and what was your first thought? Like, we should definitely do this, or was there trepidation, or was like guns blazing? Like, walk us through that process.
Yeah, I think the cool thing was they approached us first about core line product, which was really interesting, right? So let's take some core line product from Mephisto and let's put it in our Soho location for Kith. And I thought, okay, nothing better than really having that kind of litmus test to see, does the product resonate for their customer? And we quickly saw that, sales were really good, which I think kind of gave them another green light to say, okay, we actually have something here by bringing in this type of product to our stores. But of course, right, when you think of like a bit of the pinnacle of who you might do a collaboration with, I was always saying, that's who we want to work towards, right? Mm-hmm. Because they can do so much for your brand, the global reach that they have, the number of interesting stores and locations. And it wasn't just a singular like US collaboration. We released our shoes in London, in Seoul, in Tokyo. We had 7 global locations where our collab went out to, which was the first time we've ever done a global collab in our brand's history. And so a little bit of trepidation, right? You don't want to mess it up. And of course, you want to be able to deliver on both sides. You want to be a great partner to them, but you also want to put together an incredible product that ultimately sells out. And we saw phenomenal results just in the product, the end product that was made, and its performance in all these different markets. So you always love collaborations to be a learning mechanism for your brand. And it definitely was that for us. So we couldn't have been any happier with the result and the opportunity. And it was a little bit overwhelming and scary because you're hoping to be able to get that call, but you're like, maybe when we've done about 10 other collaborations that kind of build a bit more of a foundation, but fortunate to get it and fortunate that it was a big success.
What did the powers that be in France have to say when you said, hey, by the way, I got a call from Kith? Were they like, whoa, we brought Logan into this guy's delivering? Like, how was that process like between translating, I guess, the opportunity between the US market and then the global markets with your partners in France?
Yeah, I mean, I think from their side, it was just, immediate excitement about what an incredible opportunity. And then to find out it was not going to just be focused solely on the US, because typically when I'm bringing them is US focused collaborations. And then to find out, hey, no, this is going to go in their Kith flagship store in Paris. This is going to be in London. This is going to be in Seoul and Tokyo. I think they were, a little bit overwhelmed, but very excited about the opportunity, realizing that it needed to be this global collective effort. And I quickly made it that, right? I needed to bring in my design team. I needed to have the team in France on these phone calls with us. So I think they loved every aspect of that, kind of realizing, hey, this is going to be a major brand moment for us, and we should treat it as such and find a way to use this as a way to kind of continue to push the brand forward for the next couple of years, use this as a launching point.
Do you feel like it helps, because it's such a well-known brand as well, do you feel like it helps reach the younger consumer too?
100%. I mean, I think that the first thing I did is as the collab gets leaked and as I start to see feedback, the first place you're going to go, for me at least, is going to be some of the sneaker threads. It's going to be on Reddit. It's going to see like, what is a consumer who is not my core consumer on a day in, day out basis? What is their feedback for it? And that was incredible. Looking at their Instagram account, looking at the type of comments, people loving the different colorways or the attention to detail, or people just asking the question like, who or what is Mephisto? What is this product? And why does it seem like it's a very expensive sneaker, right? And then just everything that's come after that, right? The number of influencers of people I've seen those specific shoes on has been incredible, right? We did an all orange colorway that was like a New York Knicks colorway. And leading up to that championship run the last couple weeks was incredible. Like, I'm in New York City, I'm wearing the pair, I'm seeing the pair, live with other people. I'm seeing people, post pictures of them on flights to San Antonio wearing it. And I'm going like, this doesn't get any cooler. Like, it's super fun to see all of that in motion and just to experience it. And to your point, Kith is incredible for that. They bring in a consumer that pulls people in from every way of life across the country, across the globe. And that made it really exciting for a brand like us to be able to have that type of reach to a younger consumer and to see how they would style those shoes and represent them in a very different way than how we typically see it.
I mean, I have to say that this industry, this happens to me and my three kids as well, but someone who's, relatively uncool, this industry often provides those moments for uncool guys like us. No offense, Logan, to get kind of sucked into something like this and be like, how did I get here? And how am I a part of this thing? How do I know this cool designer from Nike who's historic and designed for Jordan? How am I looking at shoes that are part of the Knicks championship run and partnering with Kith? You got to kind of pinch yourself for some of these cool opportunities that you're having right
every single day. My 10-year-old son, it gives me a little bit more cachet with him that, like, hey, dad actually does something cool with shoes. It's not just women's sandals and cork sandals, right? So that made it really fun. It's one of those moments where you're like, yeah, you know what? Some of these things come together and they help us out a little bit there. So
that's funny.
That's awesome. And so timely as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't have timed it much better in terms of that and the Knicks having that historic moment. So it was really fun.
So you recently stepped into your role as president and CEO. You talked a little bit before we started rolling about using AI. And then also, so what would your advice be to maybe new leaders that are coming into the industry?
Excellent question. AI, I think, is a fascinating topic. If you're not talking about it, you should be. If everyone in your organization isn't somehow finding a way to involve it in their day-to-day operations, they need to be. I think that's probably been the biggest thing that I've tried to emphasize. It's not an area of expertise for anybody, essentially, right? It's too new for anybody to say they can truly be an expert. But I think the goal should be to provide the tools and then to make sure that those tools are being used. One of the best examples I can think of, is that typically in every company I've worked for, large or small, Mondays have always been reserved for reporting, right? Like, you're going to spend all day Monday pulling reports to send them to executives for their roundtable meeting, their big discussion of, okay, what's working, what's not working, what are we going to do from here? And I've just found this incredible opportunity to just use AI to automate so much more of that, right? What were manual work efforts to be able to build reporting or build tools within Excel, now that can happen so much faster. And I believe now we're able to make decisions even quicker and be able to cut down that time. So the meeting doesn't become, hey, everybody look at the reporting and read it, but hey, everybody come to the meeting and be prepared to talk about what we're doing differently. So come with your action items as opposed to, let's read and react. We don't need to read anymore. You should be able to have this information at your fingertips to say, okay, here's what we're going to tweak or adjust going into the next couple of weeks throughout this season. But I think the biggest thing, like I said, is just getting people comfortable with it, making sure that they're finding ways to let it amplify what they do. I think AI is the ultimate amplification tool. I already believe I have smart people in my organization. You hire smart people. You trust those smart people. Now give them the tools to make them feel even smarter and better and to use their time more wisely, because there's nothing better than figuring out, hey, you don't need to spend time doing those tasks if you spend a few hours building a tool just by talking to it. And you just talk through the mechanism with AI, it can build what it needs to do. And then you just need to dump or connect the data. And I think it's opened up a world of opportunities, and it's very fun and exciting. I think I mess around with it all the time. I love to do it with my kids and building video games with my kids in Minecraft and letting them learn different things, but it's just building that comfort level. And I think that's really the key component right now.
Let me ask you this, because we started this conversation, Logan, off around your experience at Zappos and like the heyday of Zappos. But in the heyday of Zappos, it was famously unstructured, right? That was like the whole mentality, Tony's whole mentality. It was like no one was in charge. I mean, I assume it by default, some people were, but that for people who like structure, that's a challenge to kind of navigate. What of that did you bring with you into your leadership style, into this role? And what did you kind of cast aside as uniquely kind of for Zappos in that moment, in that time?
Yeah, I often say working at Zappos was a little bit being like in a lab rat in an experiment, because Tony would constantly come up with a new managerial way of looking at the business. We went through something called holacracy, which became published about, where, to your point, Matt, he came out and he eliminated all managers, right? There were no people managers. There were no product managers. There were no program managers. The idea of having management was kind of eliminated for a period of time. And so you learn a lot about yourself during that time, about what you like and what you don't like within an organizational structure, especially when you have one and then it's eliminated and you're trying to figure out what are the processes that be to really get things accomplished when you have certain things that have to get done. And ultimately, there's still certain people that need to make decisions. But, I think probably the biggest takeaway that I had at Zappos was, you're not going to accomplish great results by doing the same thing that everybody else does. There was a creativity, there was a level of innovation, a level of thought that Tony brought that was so different than what I was accustomed to, right? And I think that kind of bled through the organization of, don't think about tackling a problem in one singular way. There's multiple solutions to getting an answer that can be correct. And so I think oftentimes in my career, I've tried to instill that in myself and my team about thinking about what's a more creative way about going about this, right? We don't have to think about, what would be the standard way of how a consulting group might come in and try to solve the problem for your organization, because every organization is very different, large to small. And you have to really understand and know the people that you work with and how they're going to execute. And so that's one of the things that I definitely loved about it. It might have been stressful for me a lot of times, because a little bit like you put, I like structure, I like organization, I like routine. And I was constantly taken out of that, right? And it was a little bit of kind of like, okay, what's going to change today when Tony sends out an email or we go to an all hands meeting? You're kind of going like, fingers crossed that like he just doesn't just completely like change everything going on in the business. But then you came to kind of enjoy it, right? You kind of knew what you had to accomplish, but then you had to think of ways that you were still going to accomplish that in maybe a different mechanism. And that became really fun and exciting and very different than I've tried to take that in terms of how I will drive my own leadership team and myself to deliver on results, but to realize with how dynamic the market is today, you have to figure out different solutions in order to make your brand more relevant into some more product.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I'm similar, like structure. I like having structure, routine, and I like flat organizations, like personally, but to not have that on paper as like the fallback default, that had to be a challenge. So I can appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit from which you pulled through from Zappos to Mephisto, while maybe setting aside some of the other more radically kind of, I don't know, incubator kind of ideas that Tony was trying to distill within the Zappos, within the four walls
Absolutely.
of Zappos. So we're going to close out this conversation with an oldie but a goodie. It's something we haven't done in a long time. It's called What You Got, What You Getting. And this is how it works. The first thing we're going to talk about is what we got from a footwear perspective. And I got the U.S. Men's National Air Force Ones.
Love it.
That the coaching team wears on the sideline. Nike hooked me up with these, and I wore them for a portion of Sneaker Day on Capitol Hill last week.
That's awesome.
And what I'm getting, and now that I know that I can totally up my cachet with Logan's 10-year-old son, I'm going to have to get some Mephistos just so I can be cool like you are, Logan. So that's what I got. That's what I'm getting. Christie, we'll go next to you, and then Logan, you can close us out.
Okay, so similarly, what I got on Capitol Hill on Sneaker Day, I wore Nike Dunks that were burgundy. Obviously, I'm a fan of the Commanders, so I got to rep the burgundy. What am I getting? That's a great question. I think I need some new sandals for summer, so I got to do a little bit more research. Maybe Mephisto sandals. So TBD, I'll let you know.
TBD. All right, Logan, that's how it works. What you got, what you get. So we'll start what you got right now.
I got right now a prototype shoe from Mephisto that was our first kind of like comfort hiking shoe built on a Vibram outsole.
Cool.
I actually took it to Peru with me last week as we went to go hike Machu Picchu.
Wow.
And a couple other neighboring peaks.
Way to flex.
And,
that's fun.
That was kind of epic. It was really cool to kind of take this comfort shoe that now had a Vibram outsole to it to use for some really cool outdoor activities. Huge win. So very excited about that. And then I've got a really cool collaboration coming out with a fairly large influencer in New York City. He will have a friends and family pair. I made the cut for that friends and family pair. So
barely, just
barely. You know, I'm on the edge of that limit, but very excited about this. It's going to be a really kind of fun orange mint colorway, which will be pretty cool.
That's really cool. That's awesome. Logan, we thank you so much for coming on and kind of helping us peek behind the curtain of Mephisto and just like the legacy and the history behind the brand, but also the cool things that you're doing here in the U.S. market. And we really appreciate your time on Shoeing today.
No, thank you both for this opportunity. I love the footwear industry. I love everything that you guys are doing. So thank you for including me. Glad to be here. Yeah,
no problem. Folks, this has been another really cool conversation with the leaders, the movers and shakers of the industry, driving us and propelling us forward in this, our 250th year as an industry or more. And so we encourage you to go to shoeandshow.com to check out not only this episode, but all of our episodes in our over 10-year-old catalog right now, with pushing almost 600 episodes. So there's a lot to unpack and listen to, and we encourage you to do that. And make sure you subscribe and rate us where you get your podcast so that more and more people get access to the conversations. And until next time, Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.